Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Welcome to part 3 of getting my Serissa japonica ready for the fall bonsai shows. In part 1 and 2 of this series, I pruned up the tree, I picked a new front for the tree, I cleaned up the trunk and the branches, getting all that algae off of them, and I put down a base layer of sand for the landscape. So today I'm going to finish the landscape work, making it look like a miniature African landscape. Here is a look at the tree now. So I think it needs something over here to balance the composition out. And I don't want anything too heavy. I want it to look like this flat expanse of desert. And I was thinking maybe just my zebra. It's a subtle little detail there that kind of balances the composition nicely. So now I want to apply moss around the tree, and I have a couple of options. I could put moss underneath the tree and have sand on the perimeter, or I could have moss on the perimeter and then sand underneath the tree. So one would look like, the middle of the tree is shaded out by the canopy and nothing's growing underneath it. Or I could do the opposite, that everything on the perimeter is scorched and dried out by the sun and the only thing green is underneath the canopy of the tree. I've seen both looks in pictures, so I've got to decide which way I want to go. I was up early this morning and I tried out various sizes of rocks and shapes of rocks in the landscape, and I found it too distracting. It just took your eye away from the tree. Whereas the zebra is kind of subtle, and I think it adds to the composition. It gives that realistic element. It adds an element of scale, and I think the scale is about right. These acacia trees in nature can grow into really large trees, and I think the zebra helps kind of give you that image that it's a giant old acacia. I tried out some rocks in the landscape this morning, and they were too big. They took away from the tree. So I got some smaller stones, and I'm going to try those. And I could have just stones and no zebra, or a combination of both, some stones and a zebra there. That's what I've always had in the past. I've always had like red rocks, and I had red soil as the African landscape, and it worked pretty good. The red soil wasn't quite right. It's hard to get the right color. I even thought about grinding up some terracotta pots and making soil out of that. That could work also. So let's have a look at some of these smaller stones and see how it's looking. So I've put a combination of two stones here. They kind of fit together nice. And I could add another small stone, kind of leading your eye into the tree. And I don't know about one in the background. I don't know if I like that. It's okay. I'm not sure I need that background one. I'll try one over this side. No. More stone here, less here. No. I kind of like this one more. That's not a bad balance there. Let's try the zebra out. Yeah, it looks pretty good. It kind of leads your eye into the tree. And it counterbalances the whole composition. It makes the composition look balanced. Yeah, I'm kind of liking that. And then, I can plant my moss. So I was looking at the photos, and generally I talked about the two options, you know, green underneath the tree, and then usually it's the outer rim of the moss is like scorched straw color by the sun, and the green moss or grass is still underneath the tree. Or, you know, the whole thing is generally green. I haven't seen too many where there's just, you know, bare sand under the tree. So I'm going to get some moss. I'm going to start planting. And I'll start kind of around the perimeter and work my way in towards the center of the tree. And I'll get the moss growing really nicely, and then I found, you know, before the show you can then pick out the moss that you don't want, so you have clumps of it. And it looks pretty good. So I think I'll try that approach. It's what I've done in the past and it looked really good. You pick out that moss and you get these little moss kind of clumps that look like grass. I think that's my best option. I was playing around with the rocks some more, and here's the composition that I kind of settled upon. So it gives, as I said, it kind of leads your eye into the composition. I've got one more back here to kind of give some depth. And I think it looks pretty good. They're subtle. It doesn't take away from the tree or the composition much. It just sort of balances everything and gives a realistic element to the planting. Yeah, so I think that'll be quite good. I'll go with this and we'll see how it looks in the end. I went out and collected a bag of moss. It's really nice fine moss. Yeah, I'll show you a piece. So there's some pieces of the moss. So it was really sunny this morning, but I don't know, it's kind of clouding over now and looking like rain. It was sunny this morning and now it's clouding over and looks like rain. So I moved all the succulents back into the greenhouse here. So here's a look at the new old jade I got from Connor. It's looking really good. There's growth on the tips. No signs of stress. All the other succulents are doing well. The one, my Portula Cariafora, that I put the soap and water on and it kind of killed off the older leaves, is leafing out again. It's starting to recover and look good. I think I'll even need to prune it in places. Yeah, the other jade from Connor here, the new one is looking good, and my old one from the same tree is doing well. I'm going to start planting the moss now, so it's just a matter of wetting the moss, pushing it down nice and firmly into the sand, and it should green up and grow really well. I may have to prune it before the show, and as I said, I may pick out patches of moss to create kind of a realistic landscape. And I'll show you some examples of acacia trees and the landscape that's below them. So this moss was growing on top of pavement, so there's a thin backing layer of fine silt. And it's nice fine moss. So I'm going to begin the planting, and I'll start at the perimeter. And I've got to get the moss down So it's just slightly below the lip of the pot. I think it's still a bit too high, this landscape, so I may have to remove a bit more soil in places to get the moss down to a good level. And I'll just wet the moss with my sprayer. Making sure it's well watered and has good contact with the soil. And don't be afraid to push the moss down really hard. It doesn't hurt the moss. You can really push it into the soil. Like that. And I'm sure by showtime, you know, it'll have spread into a nice layer. It'll green up and spread, and then just before the show I can do further work. And it's just a matter of piecing it together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I find this moss is quite weed free because it's growing, you know, on top of pavement. There's not really any weeds that germinate in it. You might get the odd little weed, but generally it's pretty good. But it is something to watch out for, that you can get a lot of weeds by applying moss to your planting. So you just gotta, you know, keep up with the weeding at first, and then it tends to settle down. There's a big clump of moss here. Put that right here. So I'm going to moss up the entire planting, and then I'll have a look at it, and as I said, I'll either pick out some now or just before showtime to create some sort of interest and negative space in the moss layer, so they look more like bushes rather than grass. But it might look nice with just, you know, the moss covering the surface. Give that wet season look to the planting, and it'll certainly green it all up. I'll continue mossing up the landscape. It'll be all green, and then I'll decide if I like it or not. It may be too much. We'll see. So this kind of gives you an idea of what it would look like with sort of patches of moss and sand interspaced. It looks quite good. You can do a lot with moss and sand, making a nice looking composition. I've been working away mossing up the tree, so I'm about, well, almost halfway. And the sun has come out once again. So all the succulents have gone back outside once again in the sun. I have finished putting the moss in place, so it's certainly changed the appearance of the tree. It gives it a wet season look, which is kind of cool actually. So my next step, I've got to water the moss, water and fertilize it, and then make sure it's all pushed down thoroughly. I think for the first time in my life, I collected more moss than I need. So I have some left over to do another tree. All right, here I go with the water and fertilizer. Make sure that moss is all soaked. And then I'll push it all down, making sure it all has good contact with the soil. Give the top of the tree a misting. There we go. So I'll just come in here and make sure it's all pushed down nicely. And at the moment you can kind of see the patchwork of the moss, but over the next few weeks it'll fill in and it'll look like one layer, the grasslands, and then it'll get a pruning before the show. And maybe more than a pruning. Maybe I'll take some out. Oh, there's a monarch butterfly in here. A monarch butterfly has entered the greenhouse, so I'll make sure it gets out. I find the best method is just to let them rest, grab it by the wing, and take it outside. I'll see if I can do it now. Oh, there we go. I've got it. And I'll put it outside, right here in the sun. And off it goes. I've got the tree all mossed up, but I still have to pick out a stand, an accent plant to go with it. So there's still some work to go. But let's fly in now and have a look at the tree. Quite a transformation of this tree in the last few days. So I'm going to step back now, have a look at the tree, and I'll do a critique of it. Things that I want to change in the future, things that I like, things that I don't like. So here we go. I'm stepping back, having a look at the tree. So it's undergone quite a change in the last few days. I'm happy with the root base. The trunk's looking cool. The branches are looking good. The canopy, it's quite compact and quite rounded. I think as the edges grow out and it gets a little wider, it won't look so domed on top. It'll look a little more acacia-like. So there's plenty of time before the shows to grow it out a bit, and I think it'll take on a more natural look. At the moment it looks very pruned and proper, and maybe a little too much. It looks yeah, very, very tightly pruned. Everything's in place, and yeah, it's a little overdone, but that was my intention, to kind of prune it like this and then grow it out so it looks very natural at the shows. It's quite different with the moss on the landscape. I don't think it hurts it. I think I would like to see some variation in the landscape, maybe a bit of a, animal path or something, some variation. I'll probably get some clumps of moss as bushes just to create a bit of interest, but I don't mind the look of it. Kind of that wet season look looks quite nice. I think the pot looks good with it. I think maybe the zebra could be in a slightly different location. Maybe a little more underneath the tree like that. Yeah, I think that looks better. Yeah, so I think this is a look. I could go back to, a flatter canopy on top in the future. Maybe a little less rounded. It's hard to say. I'm sure it will evolve in the future. And hopefully look better and better each year. Here's a look at the back of the tree, which I'm hoping someday becomes the front. So yeah, the trunk is really, really nice in this view. I really like that. And I think, as I get the canopy in shape, I think I might be able to live with these branches. I think they're okay. So I've just got to grow the canopy a little lower here, fill in some spots, do a little pruning. But yeah, that's the plan. Someday this will be the front of the tree. But it looks good from pretty well all angles. It's not a bad looking tree at all. It's interesting viewing the tree from the distance. You get a really good look at the proportions and everything. My African style Serissa has undergone a lot of changes in the last few days, and I'm still trying to get used to the new look. It's still quite strange to me. So I'm going to pick out the stands and the accent plants in a separate video. Once I have all my show trees prepared, I'll do a video of just picking out stands and accent plants. So that should be a lot of fun. So that is it for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.